Melinda, please tell us about your work background and your professional experience.
Hey, my name is Melinda Ashley Meyer DeMott, and I live in Oslo, Norway. And I was born in California and came to Norway when I was 8 years old. I started working in psychiatry awards when I was around 18. It was way back in 1973. And my first education was that I became a psychiatric nurse. And then I went back to the United States and I took my master's degree at Lesley University in expressive arts and a minor in psychology. And after working there for 3 years, I went back to Norway. And then I went to Nicaragua and worked there for UNICEF in 1985 and ended up adopting my son from Nicaragua and then went back to Norway. And in Norway, most of my work has been working with refugees since the end of the 80s, where I've been working and doing research and worked as an expressive arts psychotherapist with groups, mostly with groups with people from all over the world, because I worked at the Psychosocial Center for Refugees, which was a center for people who had experienced war trauma, but also most of our clients there were political refugees and have been tortured and been for at least 1 to 10 years in jail. So we developed group interventions of working with trauma clients. And it was, at the time in Norway, there was very, very few people who had any experience with working with refugees, with people from other cultures, and with war survivors. So we were pioneers in the field in the time. And then in the 90s, we had the Bosnian refugees, and that became my doctorate study, where I followed 4 families for 14 years. And my doctorate is called Repatriation and Testimony, where I was made 2 documentary films where I saw the value of people telling the public their stories. And that was a way of them integrating themselves, of going from private to public, to be able to tell the world what they have been through and feeling that they could find their voice, that they had a voice, that they came out of the humiliation and shame and came to a sense of, this is my experience, this is my life, and this is what I want the public to know. Mm-hmm. So today I work at the University of Southeast Norway, and I'm also working as a professor at the European Graduate School in Switzerland, where I have a public health and peace building program. And I still continue doing research with unaccompanied minor refugee boys. So I think this has something to do with my background, that I moved at a very early age, and my question has always been, what is belonging and where is home? Yeah.
Yeah. So why do you think it is important to create a sense of purpose or a sense of hope for people who seek asylum or for people who have newly arrived in a different country?
Well, it's very complex, because when you're an asylum seeker, very often you're not coming to your country of choice. It's very often a coincidence where you end up seeking for asylum. And you're an exile. You're an exile from your culture, from the politics you're known for that were normal. So all your embodied knowledge of how you grew up, the way things were done in the kitchen to school, just from the learning. Many of our refugees come from countries at war where freedom of speech is limited. And most of our schools in Europe are based on dialogue and brainstorming. And that's very scary for people who have had to repeat what the teacher says and are fearful of coming in prison if they say something wrong. So it's everything's new. So we call this the liminal space. All knowledge that you had that made you safe has to be relearned. You have to learn how to walk again. So when you're in a reception center, you're in limbo, and it depends on your status. Some people know they've gotten asylum, but most people are unsure of the new normal. How am I going to live in this country? I don't know the language. I don't know the politics. I don't know the religion. I don't even know if I'm going to be received for who I am. So it's very scary. And most people, when they come, they are so scared. And the tendency is that they withdraw. That because, and we all withdraw if we're scared. And because they've been done to, they're also not that there's a disbelief that somebody wants to help them. So, but still the arrival in a new country has a sense of hope. It's sort of like, wow, I've made it. I'm in a reception center. So there's this feeling of maybe there's a second chance. Maybe there's a third chance. And that's why it's so important to reach out immediately and say welcome, so that you don't lose that opportunity of an encounter, a good encounter. And yeah, and the way people remember this first meeting of being received, it's like it's an imprint for the rest of their life, if it's a dinner or if it's a flower. So it's amazing how much impact you can do if you have a good arrival meeting.
Melinda, I've heard you speak of people in the asylum system feeling like they're stuck in a waiting room, unsure if they're allowed to stay or made to go back to their homeland, which could be very dangerous. Can you tell us of what you have perceived in this condition, if this condition is let drift on?
Well, when I started working at the Psychosocial Center for Refugee, we were what you called a third line service. It meant that we weren't in the first line, second line, we were in the third. And by the time they were referred to us, they had maybe been in the country 1 or 2 years, and the PTSD symptoms of lack of concentration, sleeplessness, muscle pains in their body, just the whole SIPs, their whole bodies were in pain, and the isolation, the withdrawal. And it was so hard to help. It was so hard to reach them. And also this feeling that they were hopeless. They felt hopeless. They had no hope. So the longer you sit in a liminal space where you're in limbo, which a reception center is, and if the reception center doesn't normalize your life with everyday rituals, sort of how you get up in the morning, what you do, that they have activities that give you a role, a sense of purpose, to create a meaning, that you make your own food, that you buy the food, that you help to clean the center, and use your resources that you have. Some people may be carpenters, other people have a medical background, to find out what resources they have and put them into action and into role as fast as possible. Because then you create everyday rituals. You have to get up in the morning, you have to do something to create a good infrastructure in the home you're living in. And you have to recreate a sense of meaning, that I am actually a person here that means something for the collective. so that we can create a good society together, a community together. And that sense of community, of belonging, is so important. The sense of, I make a difference. I can contribute with something here. Now, if you're not given a role and you're just put in the waiting room and you're waiting and not contributing, everything becomes senseless and your senses close down. You begin to end up in a black hole where you see your past as black and your future is black, and the hopelessness really begins to attack your system. And then you don't reach out and ask for help. So you're disconnected, you're disengaged, you don't have a sense of having any control about your own life, and you really fall into a victim role, or a sense of, I'm dependent, I can't do anything to make a difference in my life. So the first thing is to do that you have some control, you have a role, you make a difference, you connect, you engage, and you contribute to the community you're living in, so that you're creating a new normal in an unpredictable space where you're actually not knowing anything about the future. We're in an unpredictable time. So refugees in this time, they're not only in their own unpredictable limbo space, but they're landing into new countries that are in limbo themselves. We're in a pandemic, we're in a collective trauma where we don't know what the new normal will be for our societies. So we have to all create within our community rituals, everyday rituals that create a sense of control and predictability to be safe. So, and it's possible. I think if you point it out, we all sense that, yeah, that gives a meaning. I have to get up in the morning and make breakfast. I have to get dressed so that I go into an action and do something. And then I can feel that I can, when I go to bed in the evening, I can let go and go to sleep and feel that I've done something. So that ritual during the day of a beginning, middle, and a closure and a reflection and a good feeling of that I've done something today gives a good night's sleep.
Yeah. Would you elaborate more on your experience of starting early interventions with new arrival that can sort of have a positive and preventive effect on long-term effects of isolation? So during the time where people are still waiting for their decision, and the decision being if they can stay here and start a new life, or if they have to return to the country they came from.
Well, when I was working at the psychosocial center in the third line, I was constantly, as a psychotherapist, saying, this is ridiculous. There must be something you can do so these people don't have to get this depressed and to become chronically mentally ill. So that's when we began to think about, we have to go and work in the reception centers. We have to do early interventions. And the research today says the most important in the early interventions is to create engagement, contact, safety, and a sense of control that you can master something, and that again creates hope. So after working with refugees for 15 years, I began to interview them. What helped? What helped? What was the interventions you received that made a difference? And then I made a group intervention based on the knowledge I received from many of my former clients from both individual and group psychotherapy, but also community work. And it was the welcome, the sense of being received, but it was also creating together, because they had no language, that they didn't know the language, but also many people that have been severe traumatized, they say, I don't have any words for what I experienced. My words don't do justice. So we began working with what we call low skill, high sensitivity, creating together. And the created act, it can be creating a picture or mosaic together. But it's called the third. So you're actually in the group creating things together. But it can also be making food together, making bread together, making it, so you're shaping something together and you're giving it a reshaping and shaping. And we found that the arts is a universal language, and it works with all the senses. So it's what you're seeing. Everybody's seeing it from a different perspective, so they can, you know, turn it around, see that nobody has a right perspective. And then you have that people can make music together, sound together, and it was a call and response, and it was very low skill. It could be something like ah, and then the other one went ooh. So this thing of playing, you got into playing together, and the kids were often part, and that the adults were able to engage and play again with their children was so healing, because it created laughter, it created a sense of being alive again, it created a sense of normality, and that you were creating this. It was the process of creating that was important, not the product. Now the product now and then could end up, even the loaf of bread could end up looking like it was a mountain, but it was the funness of creating it and sharing different knowledge. And I think this of creating is a normality of sharing. So how do you do this in your country? And how do we do it here? And this is very important, that immediately people coming to new culture, they really need to know, how do you do things here? They need not only psychoeducation, what are the normal symptoms? Well, it's normal that you will have nights where you don't sleep, that you concentration, forgetting what you did yesterday, normal, so that these stress symptoms become known for them, and that they say, oh, okay, so that's a normal reaction to a stressful situation. But also they need to know, like if I come to Ireland, I have to know, when do you eat dinner? When's the normal time to eat dinner? Uh, uh, how do you greet each other? But also, uh, what are the normal activities? For example, in Norway, people walk alone in the woods. Many people from other countries think that's weird. Why are they walking alone out there? Have they done something wrong? Are they punished? No, they love it. They just love it. That is calming and peaceful. So what is nice for some people and lovely is scary for others. So you really have to give them some culture insights, and if you have to know about it yourself. Things you think are normal can be absolutely absurd for others.
So this is my last question for you today. So why is it so important for host countries to provide, on top of everything you just said, also sufficient language classes for people who seek asylum?
Oh, well, language is, if you're going to be integrated anywhere, it's language. You have to learn the language. And why is that so difficult? And of course, children often learn the language fast. And that you change your identity when you learn the language, because in the words, there's an action. And that's why it's very important to learn the language in action. And in the arrival centers, reception centers, wherever you are, you can put the language into the everyday activities and put words to what you're doing, so that they get a sense of the language in action. Now, what happens is, why is this so resistant? Often you hear from refugees, I will not learn the language until I know if I get asylum. I'm going to My kids have to speak our language at home. Now, it's this, there's all research says if there's gonna get mutual coexistence, if there's gonna be an integration, the first thing is language, and then it's also a role and work, activity, school, being engaged in the community, in the common room where everybody moves together. But the research also points out that if you learn a new language, you will lose your culture of origin. You will change. And I had a client from Chile who came in 1973, and he, because of Pinochet, he had to be in exile for almost 20 years, and he would not learn Norwegian. That was his fight against the dictatorship in Chile. I will not give up my identity. That he will never win. And that taught me something very important about how he was still fighting a war. And my mother, she was American, she also said the same. I'm not going to learn Norwegian. That's the last thing I have is my own language. But that also gave a split in the family. My sister and I learned Norwegian within 1 year and spoke Norwegian at home. And she didn't understand a word of what we were saying. So we could lie about everything. We could, have our own world going. So this whole thing of learning a language is a whole study in itself. And again, at the Arrival Center, talk with the asylum seekers or the newcomers about, just get into a dialogue about what are their thoughts about learning a new language. So, because it's going to expand their life, give the resources of being, but it's also, there's an underlying fear there about, will I lose the language I have and never learn a new language? Who will I be then? So, but language is the key. And I know it from my own experience. I would never be in Norway today if I didn't learn the language. I would have probably been for years ago back in the United States. But I had a choice. I could have gone back. Most refugees don't have a choice. And that's important. There's something about being in exile. You cannot leave if you don't like the country. So you have to learn how to walk and to have a life in the new world you're in. So, and that's why it's so important. My last words to health workers: don't do the work for people, but be a support and a guide and help them to have enough courage to learn the language, learn the culture, because there's a witness there who is encouraging you and saying that you're welcome. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Melinda, for speaking to us today. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me, and good luck.